Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. As we are waiting for some other attendees to trickle in, then I would say we can start. Today's webinar is on active mobility, bringing peoples together. This session is part of Daring Cities Conference, the global virtual forum for urban leaders tackling the climate emergency. My name is Tumi Tran, and together with my colleague Himanshu Raj from the Sustainable Mobility team at ICLE World Secretariat, I will be hosting this webinar for you today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. As you can see, you have been automatically muted. However, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will aim to fold them in the conversation or address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. We also want to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and the recording file will be shared on the Daring Cities website shortly. In the handouts pane, you can find a technical information sheet with all the information I just shared with you. Before we get started, I would like to launch the first poll so that more participants can also join us. And for this poll, it's before COVID. And the question is, which mode of transport did you use to go to work before COVID? Walking and cycling, public transportation, shared mobility, private vehicle, or I work from home? And in another 10 seconds, I will close the poll. So you have 10 seconds, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, close. And so it seems that, well, public transportation is the winner along with private vehicles, and then 23% on walking and cycling and working from home. And if you enjoy the first poll, I would say I can have the second poll, which is same question, but after COVID. So which mode of transport are you planning to use in the post-COVID time? Walking and cycling, public transport, shared mobility, private vehicle, I work from home. And it seems that there are a lot of, among the winning ones, there are work from home and walking and cycling, and you have still 10 seconds to put your answers. Oh. Okay. Okay. And now I will share with you the answers later on. Since now we have a good number of attendees, welcome everyone. And today's webinar aims to bring experts together to share their thoughts and practical experiences in shaping a positive walking and cycling environment in order to assist the cities around the globe in implementing sustainable modes of transport that are accessible to all. During the COVID-19 pandemic, walking and cycling turned into preferred modes for individual mobility in cities. And this session will reflect on the importance of active mobility and how local governments can seize the opportunity offered by the pandemic with an improved urban design and city planning. So let me introduce the panel of speakers and I thank them also for being with us today. Our first speaker today is Kirsten Wilkins, Managing Director, Open Street Cape Town. Kirsten is an urban designer and experienced architect with over 15 years of experience in advancing social justice of spaces, of mobility and spatial design. As the managing director of Open Streets Cape Town, Kirsten is tasked with pairing the imperative of overcoming spatial and social divisions with reimagining South African streets as public spaces for gathering and connection. Our second speaker today will be Mangesh Dig, an environmental officer at the Pune Municipal Corporation. Mangesh has been working on the environmental status report of the city of Pune for the past 10 years, and he relates the various city projects towards sustainable development. Currently, Mangesh is working on localizing the SDG goals for the city of Pune and is preparing its air pollution action plan. Our third speaker today is Amy Gauthier. She is the Chief Knowledge Officer at the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy. Amy leads the International Policy Program, Global Research and Projects, and Monitoring and Evaluation. Previously, Amy worked also on transport projects in Ghana, Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, Tanzania, and Uganda, including bus rapid transit, cycling, and walking projects. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Kirsten.
Hey there, thank you so much. Let me see if you can. Right, can you see that first slide of mine?
Yes, we can.
Super. All right, fantastic. Thanks. Hoping all the tech works with us. So hi to everyone attending today. My name is Kirsten Wilkins, urban designer and experienced architect. I've worked for many years now on urban transformation projects across South Africa, from low-income housing solutions to creating the tall building policy for our central business district. And in my time as an urban designer, I've worked for the richest of landowners and local community projects where once a store owner paid me kindly with a pair of shoes. All in crafting experiences through design to shift policy and forward justice to transform mobility in our cities. At present, I am the Managing Director of Open Streets Cape Town. And for the past 7 years, our organization has been transforming streets in Cape Town to create temporary car-free spaces, to pilot demonstration projects, to research urban futures, and lead in vibrant cycling advocacy. Our vision is to radically increase the use and ownership of streets by people and communities across the city, with the ultimate goal of bridging the social and spatial divides in our city. Now, if you were to ask someone to describe Cape Town to you, the answer will very much depend on who you ask. Our city has many guises, all of which have been made clearer through the COVID pandemic. We are the oldest city in South Africa, and so have the longest history of dispossession of land. And I want to acknowledge that this talk and where I'm sitting is being presented from the traditional land of the Khoisan people, who through apartheid and a systematic segregation of non-white communities, forced removals, and other sets of legislation sought to arrange and oust all communities of color, using in particular modernist zoning and planning regimes, which importantly still persist to this day. Now, the reason the context for me is so critical is that when people ask how our city responded to the COVID pandemic and what changed, I can't talk about the bike lanes like Paris or plazas like Milan. That is not the story of Cape Town. Our story is about communities coming together in a profound way to feed, house, and care for those left unemployed. And for a brief moment, we had trust in decisive political leadership, and things changed for us overnight. Sure, I would have loved 1 kilometer of bike lanes, even 10 meters maybe, but the legacy of COVID is not that for us. It's a profound experience of what 8 months of leadership and concerted citizen-led effort can achieve. And I'm hopeful that the realization that the speed at which change is possible and that people have agency can be brought to bear on climate change, transport, and justice going forward. So I want to connect today these three important spheres of climate change, transport, and justice, and their relationship to citizen-led action. And I want to also share with you a video, which I'm sure will work, of an example of a project gaining traction here in Cape Town. So I want to chat to you quickly about these 3 points because despite COVID, we still have climate change, justice, and transport to address. And so for me, much of climate change adaptation and mitigation measures revolve around optimizing and transforming infrastructure from a second industrial revolution era. So coal electricity to solar, reclaiming urban ecological systems from the concrete jungle, sloughing off our reliance on fossil fuels. Sometimes we move towards innovation because we want to, and sometimes because we must. Most people, I feel, have come to accept the science, but change is slow. And in the area of climate change, we need something more. And this is where transport becomes so important. Transport, as we know, is the single highest contributor to global CO2 emissions. Not only that, but in Cape Town, because of communities of color being forced to the outskirts of our city by racial segregation, citizens in my city spend on average 40% of their monthly income just on transport access to metropolitan centers. Now, the important thing I want to mention today is that transport is not like the bulk infrastructure we're trying to optimize, like water or electricity. People don't flow like molecules or respond according to equations. Transport and the mobility of people enables them to live their lives, to pursue education, to work, to explore what it means to be an urban citizen. Currently, transport planning is dominated by engineering guidelines and standards. And what I've found is that the one-size-all-fits approach made for everyone is simply perfect for no one and offers up, and from a climate change response point of view, only offers up e-vehicles as a solution. And we know that's not enough. Transport needs to be more. The street space itself on which transport depends is not simply infrastructure either, and I think it's very important to make this point. Not like water pipes or electricity cables. The space that we drive on and the space that we cycle on has significance. But our streets in Cape Town have been used purposely to divide our city by race and class, and in many respects is part of an ongoing narrative of land dispossession. Streets, as Open Streets believes, are public space. There are open air town halls in which our citizenry plays out. And so transportation and the movement of people and public space is not to be revolutionized by efficiencies, I feel, to address climate change or even technology. But I propose that we change our streets by rethinking participation in the making of these spaces and ask, why do people move? Where would they like to be? What is the experience in getting there? Now, we know the answers to these questions are going to open up truths to deep-rooted inequalities. And so transport for me is a doorway into speaking about land justice. We've seen this in COVID, and I urge you to step through. Not everyone has the same access. Not everyone has the same ability to move or the time and resources to do so. Some of us need to walk faster to be safe. Some of us can't travel at night or travel unaccompanied. So when streets are people spaces and when these spaces are more just and more equitable and more inclusionary, I think a more whole citizenry can collectively tackle climate change, and a more holistic whole planet solution is achievable. And that's really why I wanted to underpin the importance of climate change, justice, and transport as it as it is attached to notions of active citizenry. So the question is, how do we contribute to a more just city in this COVID context of change being so much more possible? How does this happen? The transport, and by implication, how does this positively impact our response to climate change? So for open streets, and for me in particular, this is where citizen-led ground-up solutions are so compelling and are coming to the fore. Hyperlocal solutions created by people experiencing and solving problems for themselves is what we've seen here in Cape Town, and where I believe that policy and government should continue to support and focus. I want to give you one example now from Cape Town, where Open Streets is focusing its time to address climate change, active mobility, and justice in this time. And this is where it's time for the video from my most esteemed technical team.
Imagine Cape Town with more bicycles on her streets, kids riding to school, secure spaces to park bikes, cycle lanes for an easier journey to and from work or school. It might seem impossible given the current reality, but we can do something to transform Cape Town's mobility story.
It doesn't matter how stressful a day I've had during the course of the day. When I get on my bicycle and I cycle home, I feel immediately better. I feel immediately more hopeful.
For me, the benefits is that you get to meet new people. Well, I enjoy cycling because it keeps me fit.
Taking yourself to work and enjoying the view and having a fresh outlook early in the morning.
I feel ready to work when I get to work. Yeah, I feel rejuvenated.
It helps me get to where I need to go quicker.
For me, it's therapy basically. So I get to collect my thoughts when I'm on the bike. That's why I really love bicycles.
And of course, saving money.
I think it's very important that we collectively join together so that we can see the future unfold today.
If more people were able to cycle safely, then we would have less cars on the road as well.
A cycling friend in Cape Town, wow, that would be a dream. No more traffic, less people on the road, and it's safer as well.
I think people are much more aware of climate change now because we're actually feeling the impacts. As these disruptive technologies come along, as congestion becomes intolerable, as we start having electric vehicles and which are expensive, but if they're shared, not expensive. And as we start to understand how very expensive it is to own a car, we can really start to, I think that a lot of these things will start to change anyway.
It all starts with like-minded individuals coming together with a common cause. Let's join forces and create a critical mass. Join or start a bike bus. It's a great way to start cycle commuting. And just like that, the impossible starts to become a reality.
Get on your bike, get on the road and join the two-wheel commuting revolution.
Okay. Extra generation by Kirsten not required. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm really. I hope you really enjoy that. Okay. So the Bike Bus program and its partner, the Walking Bus program in Cape Town, have many similarities, and I like to often speak to them together about them together because they create a really compelling story of the necessary social infrastructure required to overcome challenges to moving safely in our city, despite physical infrastructure not being in place. The Bike Bus program has been running since 2014, promoted and developed by cycling activists for weekly commutes, with bike buses accompanying each one of our Open Streets days that we've hosted now over 23 days across the city since our inception. The route map that you see on screen now is the route map for our Gugulethu bike bus. It is the longest and most complex ride of all of the ones we offer. From home to the inner city is 17 kilometers in distance. Importantly, it crosses across 5 distinct racially and spatially separate neighborhoods and navigates 5 large transport interchanges with little or no infrastructure support. Our marshals and leaders are that support. Public transport, being failing train infrastructure and reduced capacity under lockdown, has restricted access to longer commutes. And Cycling as such is not safe. Cycling is not safe as yet, and bicycles are still needing to navigate vehicle-dominated spaces and gang-dominated territories. Cycling muggings and bike jackings are too regular an occurrence, and really is that cycling in a group is the safest way. A group ride also means that less experienced cyclists can build confidence, learn routes and techniques. And while this program has been running for quite some time, COVID has moved its prominence to the fore and ushers in an era of citizen-led transport infrastructure. And our advocacy efforts are now to move funding towards having the bike bus program recognized, with over 10 bike buses operating across the city as an official commuter mode. This will hopefully lead to budgets for improving infrastructure on particular routes, scaling up our marshal and leader training programs, and further gaining funding for equipment such as lights for nighttime riding and early winter mornings, as well as monitoring and tracking gear to measure our program growth. So all this to say that while COVID has not served up bike infrastructure as we may have liked to have seen with green paint and cones and bollards, it has shown that projects such as the bike bus can escalate and grow through collective support from cycling clubs and NGOs. And with more change possible, as what it is that we gained from the COVID pandemic, as an organization, we feel very optimistic. We are the infrastructure, and we look to promote just and a climate conscious future because it's led by people. And so I hope this project inspires you to elevate people first responses in transport, and particularly the role of active mobility towards building more just and equitable cities, where we can increase the choice of mobility, we can respond justly to climate change, and we can work together and be people focused and citizen led. And that's it from me for today.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. I can share with you while the second speaker will prepare, then I can share with you the outcome of the polls. This was the first poll on pre-COVID situation, so where public transportation was 27% and private vehicles was 27%, and then walking and cycling and I work from home is 23%. And the second poll instead was and the second poll post-COVID is walking and cycling has an increase of 3%, 26, but walking from home is the king. And this has shown how important it is, what Kirsten has mentioned as well, about the importance of infrastructure, but also that the infrastructure is us, in the sense that it's our way of thinking and our habits that make the difference. And I would like to move to Pune and Mangesh, who will share with us the view of a future-proof vision of Pune and how to create a street for people.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So
I think you have to share your presentation though.
Oh, I did press the button right now for sharing. Is my screen visible?
We can share it for you.
I just clicked that button for sharing my screen.
You have been made. Okay, I can share my screen so that, and then you just have to tell me when I need to press.
Oh, okay. That will be
yes.
Every time I have to say press. But I'm able to. Can you give me that button for sharing the screen once more? I can try that.
Sure. Let me see.
Yeah, so now I have got that, and I say show my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, now we can.
All right, okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm Mangesh Dige, Environment Officer at Pune Municipal Corporation, and today I'll be talking about the mobility scenario of Pune City. This is my city, Pune City. The city was known as the city of cycles way back in 70s, 80s, and slowly with industrial revolution, it changed to moped city, that is a two-wheeler city, and currently it's a mixed mode traffic scenario, as you can see in the slide, where number of cars also are on rise. So when we look at the scenario here, what are the kind of vehicle in Pune? As we can see here, for a city of area 331 square kilometer, the population is 3.4 million as per the census, but the number of vehicle registered as of 2020 is around 4.1 million. So that's the kind of people to vehicle ratio that the city is facing with. But we can see here that from past 5 years, the number of vehicles which are on rise, these vehicles are the public transport type of vehicles like taxi cabs, the buses, and auto rickshaws. So that's a good indicator for the city that we are experiencing. Well, the transport sector emerges at 23% of GHG emission. Next slide. It's taking little lag for the slide to come up. Okay. So when we did the smart city mission, under smart city mission, when we did the public opinion survey, we surveyed around 300,000 people within a period of 2 months, and obviously what emerged out is that the transport and the mobility sector was the most concerning subject to the city of Pune, to the Punekar. And thus, we created a vision for Pune city. The city aspires to become one of the most livable cities in India by solving its core infrastructure issues in a future-proof way by making its neighborhood beautiful, clean, green, and livable. So with that in mind, the first step we did is we looked at the federal government level policies. Some of the policies are enlisted here: National Urban Transport Policy, some green mobility scheme, and also when we prepared our Pune resilience strategy, that strategy also mentioned very strongly about strengthening low carbon shared mobility services in the Pune urban region. So our first move was to bring in all the stakeholders of mobility in the city. We brought in the traffic police, the regional transport office, the municipal authorities, including the elected representatives, as well as the expert NGOs. So we did a lot of discussion over how we should go about it. And what emerged out is a different set of policies for different sectors of mobility. We had, with respect to traffic transportation, done a lot of studies. Way back in 2008, we had prepared a comprehensive mobility plan, which we upgraded in 2018. So a lot of data was taken into consideration when preparing these policies. Some of them like Walk Smart Pedestrian Policy, Pune Streets Program, Urban Street Design Guidelines, Parking Policy, Comprehensive Bicycle Plan, Public Bicycle Sharing System, Urban 95 Program. So all these fed into different policies that the city adopted. So when these policies were to be implemented in real life, so here is one photograph which shows one of the pilot stretch which was taken under the Smart City mission. And we can see the before and after scenario, how the streetscapes were changed for pedestrian and cycle friendly streets. Well, taking cues from the pilot stretches, we also took one more important road within the heart of the city, and we converted that into what you see here. And people accepted it very well. And then once the people accepted it, we started retrofitting the streets. And as of 2019, we have done around 65 kilometers of the street, which are retrofitted for urban streets like this. And we have a plan to go for 100 kilometers of smart the public under the urban street program. Now, in this program, the different elements that which went on the streets, starting from bulb outs to bollards, lighting, tabletop crossing, and safety aspects. So we focused on having streets universally accessible to all. And when we did the urban street design guidelines, this document necessarily stressed on the street elements, the safety elements, and the multi-utility zone. So here we can see in the plan of the road and the cross-section of the road, wherever there is BRT is an essential part of the central part of the road. And when we look on the side edges, here the footpath, the wider footpath, and the cycle track, that is non-motorized transport, is given priority. And this is how we have gone about designing our streets. We also prepared the parking policy, and recently it was accepted by the general body of the municipal corporation, and we focused more on the core area of the city where parking policy is being implemented. But along with it, we also took the major important radial roads, and now we have the parking policy which will be implemented on these roads. There will be no free parking, it will be paid parking only. So this is how we wanted to convert our cities, which once upon had the cycling glory, and give back to the city the cycling network, what it needs to do. And these are some of the photographs. So cycle tracks, it's not just the cycle track, but other infrastructure along with it. That is the green buffer, the shaded walkway cycle track, the shaded sit-outs for people also to enjoy. So this is how we are integrating all the non-motorized transport infrastructure in our cities. Regarding public bicycle sharing program, this is the network that we are focusing on, and what we want to do is to create this network where it could be dedicated cycle track, it could be painted cycle track, it could be mixed mode cycle track, depending on the location and the geography of the area that we have. And this program also received a good response from the citizens. There's a link about the bicycle plan on this slide. Next slide. Well, while designing street, we also took into consideration the urban 95 elements. Pune city is also one of the urban 95 cities under the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. And you can see that we also have taken into consideration children below the age of 95 centimeter and lesser height. The idea is that when we design streets for children, they can be used by all. So the Urban 95 program helped us a lot in bringing about few of the changes in the street design guidelines. Regarding mass public transport system, right now, as of today, the metro project is under construction, and total of around 33 kilometers of the pilot stretches are being undertaken. And there are 3 corridors which we have started constructing. So we see Pune Metro as one of the important projects for cities mobility, wherein as per the comprehensive mobility plan, the highest density corridors are taken up for the metro system. Regarding the BRT, bus rapid transit system, we had launched BRT system way back in 2005-06 with few pilot stretches. We had a lot of learnings on this. We stumbled upon few of the aspects since it was new. But as of today, the green lines which you see here are BRT functional roads, and the red lines are the ones which are going to come up in future. Plus, the existing pilot stretches will be retrofitted to suit the newer designs of BRT. And along with the BRT buses, we stressed upon the electric buses. As of today, we are having 142 electric buses which are in operation. We started with 25 buses around 8 months ago, which received a very good response. The ticket fare was same as the regular buses. And today we have 142, and we are poised to grow to around 500 electric buses in the near future. And regarding the earlier bus fleet, 70% of the diesel buses are converted to CNG buses. So here we are focusing on the greener mobility, greener fuel for the bus transit system. So all this mobility system works towards having a clean air for city, and under the National Clean Air Program under federal government, the government of India, Pune City has also prepared its action plan, Pune City Air Pollution Action Plan, and there are various stakeholders who are helping us to make this plan better and implement it. So when we look at all these projects, be it pilot project or pan-city projects, it is important for the city government to put in money where it is required and what the policy says. So here you can see the green color graphs where from 2015 onwards, the focus for the budget has been towards walk, bus and cycle. So public transport system and the non-motorized transport are in focus. City also did a very different innovative thing where a lot of auto rickshaws which were plying on petrol and diesel, they were requested to convert to CNG, and the city government provided a subsidy to these auto rickshaws to the tune of 12,000 rupees per rickshaw for those who convert to CNG. And till date, we have converted around 16,000 auto rickshaws. Auto rickshaws is a three-wheeler, basically intermediate public transport system. Well, the COVID scenario gave us an opportunity to understand what if scenario when if all the vehicles from the roads disappear, how much is the impact on pollution level. So we monitored that very closely, and we found that the PM10, 2.5, and specifically the NO2 emissions have drastically reduced. And this is one live lab experiment that we got to do, and we understood the impact of vehicular pollution on city roads. So with all these, we are focusing on the sustainable development goals, all the 17 goals we are reporting in our annual environment status report. And with SDG 13 and all these mobility related projects, we are targeting an action to combat climate change. Well, when we did all these projects and the various road stretches and retrofitted them, a lot of cities from India are regularly visiting Pune City to understand the different design aspects, all the process that we have undergone, what the learnings we are, and this is how we are sharing with other cities what all we are doing. Pune City also received in early 2020 Sustainable Transport Award, which was received by representative of ITVDP on behalf of Pune Municipal Corporation. So with all these different aspects of the city and the various projects that are taken towards improving our urban streets for the non-motorized transport, the BRT, the electric buses, EV mobility, we are trying to bring people together, happy people for an active mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mangesh. And thank you also for sharing the points on walking and cycling that needs to be integrated with public transport and in the same time having at the same time also making sure that the budgets are allocated in where the policies are so that they can be enabled. There is a question from the audience before we go to Amy, and it's from Mark Wessel, and he's asking whether the bikes are allowed on public transport on the buses in Pune, for example.
Well, as of now, we don't have the system for allowing bikes on public transport system because that needs a change in little bit of design. But we are thinking of that as an end-mile connectivity. Well, when the metro comes, we'll have a mechanism to have some bikes. But that would be an experiment for us to do, but that can come in the later stages.
Okay, thank you very much. So over to you, Amy, and Amy will share with us a more global perspective, and it links very well with Pune as they are the host for the next Mobilize conference.
Great. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you all can see that.
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. You can't always rely on technology to work, so I'm super happy that at least in this moment it's happening. So great, thank you so much. I want to thank you, Tumi, for inviting me to speak on this panel. It's been great to hear both what Kirsten and Mangesh have said, and I have a lot of respect for both of their work. So I wanted to talk briefly about walking and cycling in the time of the coronavirus. And I wanted to do it in the frame of looking at yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So when we think about where were we before Corona, we were looking at car-oriented cities being developed that were alienating to people, that often didn't have space for pedestrians or cyclists in them. And when they did, the quality of the infrastructure wasn't that great. There were obstructions, there were open drains, there was a lack of paving, so it was safer to walk in the roadbed, especially with strollers and mobility assists. Even when there was infrastructure for both cycling, as is the case here in this picture, but also sidewalks, cars often invaded them and made them unusable. But just to give a shout out to Pune, I know we just heard about it, but I think they did a remarkable transformation of what their public space and public realm for pedestrians can be, and it's really quite astonishing. And they did that, and just to give a shout out to what Mangesh was talking about, they did it partly by embedding in policies the street design guidelines, the the streets program, but they also did it with their budget. And I think that the budget is a reflection of values, and the fact that they dedicated 50% or more of their budget to walking, cycling, and public transport is a big part of showing their values on the street. And it's a beautiful picture when that happens. It's a safe place for families, for kids, and everyone. Mexico City has also done some really good things. This is a dedicated, protected bike lane on Reforma Avenue, but they've also included bike share into their city, which almost doubled the number of women cyclists in the city. So there are some good things happening, including in Dar es Salaam, where along the BRT corridor, they built cycle lanes that were parallel to the entire corridor. So cities were doing things. But then we come to today, and we've entered into a new and unknown world. And so let's see how we're doing. I think one of the first things that a lot of cities discovered was that there was a lack of public space. So these are some pictures from Jakarta of overcrowded public spaces due to the lockdown. They didn't have places to go, and so they came out to the available space that they had. Jakarta is addressing this by opening up streets for pedestrians and cyclists. So there's, there's games being played on the streets. There's opening of space for cyclists and pedestrians. And I just wanted to take a beat here and say, streets are our most sacred and precious public spaces. And if in this moment, that's what we're seeing, that this is our great public space and that we need to actually rethink how we use this space, then that's an amazing thing. We're seeing this also in New York City with streeteries, but around the world, there's over 300 cities that are opening up their streets, opening up their curb space, and developing new things. The other big thing that we're seeing is the emergence of cycle lanes. And so I think this is partly a reflection of you can open up space for walking, but if the distances are too long, then you can't really walk anywhere. So how are you going to facilitate people moving around the city? And so that's why we're seeing a lot more cycle lanes pop up. So this is Jakarta. This is their first pop-up bike lane, and they just made a commitment to make it permanent. So that's amazing. This is Mexico City. This is on Insurgentes Avenue. They're calling it an emergent bike lane, but they want to move it to be permanent to create a complete and healthy street for all. But 6 months ago, it would have been inconceivable to even think of putting a bike lane on this street. So these unthinkable things are happening. In India, where they have been making really good strides with walking, cycling has been lagging behind. This is a moment that the national government is seizing. Hey, what if we rethink our cities for cycling? And so they created a Cycles for Change challenge, where over 100 cities have registered to be part of it. Over 600 civil society organizations have come to help. It's galvanizing change all across the country, working with citizens to make that change happen. In Ethiopia, we're seeing that COVID-19 has added momentum to the progressive NMT, non-motorized transport initiatives that they had started. So there's a walking and cycling strategy that was just launched at the national level. There's a national council being formed and budgetary support for that. Within the midst of all of this, we're also seeing what COVID has also kind of highlighted or exacerbated, which is the pandemic of systemic inequalities. So these are pictures from New York around the Black Lives Matter movement that happened as a result of the unjust murders of many Black people in the United States, but specifically George Floyd was the kind of catalyst for this. And this has resonated across the world. Like, I mean, so when we look at what's happening, who's safe to be in our streets, who's safe, who is criminalized for being in the streets by the color of their skin, or the gender of the person, or religion. There's a lot of ways that people can feel unsafe. And we're seeing this even right now in this moment. We're seeing protests against police brutality in Nigeria. We're seeing protests against gender violence and femicide in Namibia. There's inequality in who has access to this space, and it's important to recognize, as Kirsten very eloquently was talking about too, these things are baked into our institutions, into our policies, into our planning programs. We need to be really mindful of that. So within all this pain and promise, where are we going to go? What is tomorrow going to look like? How are we going to let this moment transform us for the better? So there's some basic things. What are the conditions that make for good walking and cycling? The first one is having a free street grid. This is in Dar, where the street grid is unconnected, and it's hard to actually connect the different communities together. But even within the street grid, you'll see a lack of basic services, whether it's the paving, water and sewage, stormwater management, and I consider public transport a basic utility, so that also should be included in this kind of basic foundation for walking and cycling. But this also, it's not just informal settlements that we need to look at, it's also car-oriented sprawl. And again, this goes to spatial inequity too. Like if you look at places in the periphery who may be oriented towards car-oriented sprawl, they also they may have lack of investment in other infrastructure, whether it's walking or cycling infrastructure, stormwater management, etc. But to make a good walking environment, you need to have dedicated space, and also for cycling, it needs to be safe to use and easy to use. One thing that we look at is not just the infrastructure on the side of the street or in the street, but also how do you cross the street. This is important for walking and cycling. Here, this is a tabletop crossing in Dar es Salaam, where the cars actually and motorcycles and buses have to come into the pedestrian realm. The pedestrian realm is kept level, and the cars and motor vehicles have to enter that space, and so that gives priority to the pedestrian. But it's also a way to ensure universal access for all. And this is a picture in Fortaleza. Reclaiming space for people from cars, it helps slow them down. The number one thing that you can do is for cycling is to create protected, dedicated networks so that corridors are connected to each other and you can actually get around the city. When you do that, you'll see a dramatic increase in the number of cyclists, like in Fortaleza here. But you also have to understand, you have to be able to walk and cycle to something. So where are you walking and cycling? Do you have access to services and goods in a walkable and cyclable distance? Green space is important. It's going to become more and more important in the climate crisis, helping cooler spaces give shade, deal with air and noise pollution, but also having spaces for play for both adults and children, like really creating streets and places for the people that live in them, not just for cars. There's some tools and references on how we get there. One is the TOD standard has these 8 principles that are the foundation for this marriage of land use and transportation, which is access. 15-minute neighborhoods, which is also something that's coming out more and more from COVID. These principles are the foundation for that. We have the Grow Cycling Toolkit. If you are interested in understanding how your city is doing, there's a city assessment tool, but it also gives you an action plan on things that you can do as a city, given your constraints, with metrics and resources. We're about to launch a new pedestrians toolkit. We released it a couple of years ago. We're updating it. We're including what's new in this one is the city level spatial analysis and metrics that we're putting in there, so you can analyze your city that way. And yeah, and just to put a plug in here for Mobilize, if you want to learn more about these tools, including the Pedestrians First tool, feel free. We encourage and invite all of you all to come to Mobilize Summit, a virtual convening at the end of the month. But just to, I guess this reiterates or reaffirms what Kirsten was saying, is it can't just be infrastructure, it can't just be good design. It's policy, it's social norms, it's education, it's all of these things. And I think the first place you have to start is walking and cycling for whom, and really understanding what their concerns are. So ITDP conducted this outreach to women to understand what their needs were, and this was with the results. They wanted to make it safer to walk, but specifically around schools and areas that children played in. So they were able to design this. We did a focus group in Recife to women, and what they found was that one of the key concerns was crime and gender violence, and that's not something that you can solve with infrastructure. So how are we going to address these things that make people feel safer to be in the public space that we so well design? And finally, I just wanted to end with this call to action, actually. Over the weekend, I heard this from Brian Stevenson, who is the Executive Director of Equal Justice Initiative. And he said, we are ultimately judged by how we treat the rich. We're ultimately judged not by how we treat the rich, the powerful, and the privileged, but how we treat the neglected and the marginalized. And so we've seen in the past 6 months that we are capable of doing extraordinary things, things that we wouldn't have dreamt of, rethinking the roles of streets as public space, the need to give space for walking and cycling, the understanding that there's a lot of inequality in access and who feels free and has access to that public space, who is deemed worthy and who has a right to that space. And we need to let this moment transform us and transform our cities. We need our cities to reflect the dignity and value for all, but especially the most neglected and marginalized. And with that, how can we reimagine what our cities will be? Will they be joyful places for people? What do we want our future to be? So with that, I am done, and thank you very much. And if you have any questions about the resources or anything, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And we are 7 minutes away from the end of this presentation. 1 second. And there are like a couple of questions. I cluster a couple of questions from our audience, and they are basically for all of you panelists, and it's about, the first one would be, how do you fund this type of infrastructure and or changes? And the second one would be, what are your thoughts on public transportation and of public transportation being used as a protest tool, in the sense that in some cities there have been public transport or active mobility being used, public spaces being used as a space for protest or social claims.
Well, I'm happy to respond to the second question if you like. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Maggie.
Okay, Kristen, you can go on. Yeah.
Are you sure? Thank you.
So Kristen Mangish, and then Amy, if maybe that's an easier way.
Sure. Thanks for that. I think I'll respond to the second half of the question a little bit more specifically, because that really has affected Cape Town and South Africa as a whole. I mean, me in my personal capacity, I'm very supportive of active citizenry. And if we're gonna see our streets as public space and see transport spaces as public spaces through which we move, then I think certainly we need to accept and be welcoming of people being active citizens in those spaces. So, I mean, of course, Open Streets would never condone violence or places where people didn't feel like they belonged or they could have a voice. But I mean, I certainly think that it is a public space, and our mobility spaces are that. So I think we should be accepting and understanding of when citizens feel like they may not have enough of a voice elsewhere for transport systems to be impacted. So I think it's a really visual and special and important time for us to listen more carefully when voices are spoken in transport spaces as such. Thanks, that's it for me.
Thank you. Anyone
Thank you.
wants to add?
Yeah, I'll take the first question which you mentioned about the funds. Since being from the city government, it's really important for us to divert the fund for the right cause, because already there are a whole lot of funds with the city government to spend on developing infrastructure. But when thinking about infrastructure, the norm has always been creating flyovers and widening the roads. But when we take up these policies, but before we take the policies, it's important for us to do some pilot project, show it to people, show it to politicians, and once we do that, come up with the policy, that convinces the politicians that we are moving in the right directions. Once we are through with the policy, we make the road designs, then float out the tender, and that's how the fund is diverted for in the right direction. Well, there are other opportunities also that we have done in Pune city is exploiting the funds from the smart city mission projects. So that is also an avenue. But what's important for the city is to principally accept that we need to develop more of a non-motorized transport infrastructure and also focus more on the public transport infrastructure. Once the political level is convinced, it's easier for us to divert the funds. So that's the story from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and
Amy, over to you.
Thanks. Just to build on what both of them were talking about, I think when it comes to funding, it's really more of a question of political will, and I think that's what Mangesh was getting to. There's money available. We see money for, again, as he was saying, for flyovers, for highways, for really expensive projects. But for some reason, and this goes back to what are your values and who are you investing in? The powerful and the rich and the people who can afford private cars, or the majority of the people in the city who rely on walking and cycling and public transport. So I think that to take a deep rethink about this, but we also have to understand that it's really political will. And how do you build political will? Again, I think Mangesh had a great answer with using tactical urbanism and pilots to lower the risk of doing new things. But I think it's also partly, having people advocate for that. Like, I think that the other thing that politicians respond to is the people. So I think that's both of those things. And then in terms of protests, streets are public space and they should be spaces of expression. So I'm totally for that. And I think when we see destruction of public transport and things like that within the public space, that's usually a reflection of anger and the feelings that there's no other recourse. So I think that that's a problem of democracy and not really a problem or a lack of democracy, and it sucks. Like in Jakarta, they just went through protests and riots against a labor law that destroyed a couple of the BRT stations, and that's heartbreaking. But when people don't feel like they have other ways to communicate, then they use the tools that they have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for these insights. And since we are we ran out of time actually, then I would like to thank all of you. In case there are additional questions, we will forward them to the speakers and then come back to you. And I would really like to thank Kirsten, Mangesh, and Amy for sharing their thoughts and experiences, and also all the participants that have shared their very insightful questions as well. And on behalf of ICLEI Local Governments of Sustainability and our presenters, I would like to thank you all for joining today. And if you liked this session, please do sign up for the next ones of Daring Cities. Oh, sorry. Which the next one is already tomorrow on ecologistics, achieving low emission urban freight transport. And Yes, thank you very much. I know that there hasn't been that much time for discussion and questions. However, I think that all the presentations from the speaker have been very, very insightful, and in the same time, they had provided us so much food for thought, coming from like the fact that it's not all about infrastructure, but also how do you leverage on the power of citizen-driven organizations, on how walking and cycling can be integrated with public transport, and at the same time how to allocate and advocate for better budgeting so that they also reflect in the policies and the vision of the cities for a future-proof vision. And last but not least, about all the different activities and importance of walking and cycling in not only building back better after the COVID, but also to address all the inequality and make sure that we do value streets as open spaces and public spaces. So thank you very much, everyone. And hope to see you in the next sessions.